You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Welcome back to Making Data Simple. This is Al Martin. I'm your host. Hopefully you're having a fabulous day. If this is your first time here, thank you. If this is your, multiple times here, then you're just an awesome person. We know that. So today I have with me William McKnight, and William leads Data Decoded. He's a fellow podcaster. So as you know, I lead Making Data Simple. That's where you found yourself today. And I wanted to chat with William because he also is a data guru. He's passionate around data and want to talk about podcasting, want to talk about data and everything else that fits in between. William, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing great, Al. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I'm ready to learn some things today. Hey, could you introduce yourself real quick?
Okay, so William McKnight here. I'm president of McKnight Consulting Group, and I have 30 years in data and all aspects of data in that time period. And right now, I do quite a bit of end-user consulting. So I build a lot of strategies and lead implementations for clients that are doing good old data warehousing and analytics. But also definitely a lot of big data these days and master data management, and really everything in between, all the seams. And there's so many right now. It's such a dynamic field. We're preparing data for artificial intelligence. We're getting into IoT. So it's just a great field that I really enjoy. And I love sharing back. And the other part of my duty is really being an analyst. And in that role, I do a lot of writing, a lot of speaking like this, and a lot of just sharing back. So I'm happy to be here today and hopefully get the chance to do some of that with you.
Where are you located?
I'm in Dallas.
In Dallas. So you're a Big D fan. You're a Dallas fan?
Well, I don't mind the Dallas teams, but I have my own teams that I brought with me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What'd you bring with you?
I brought the Tampa Bay Buccaneers from when I grew up there, and the Golden State Warriors from when I lived out there.
Well, thank God you're not a Dallas fan. I know some Dallas fans in IBM, like Daniel Hernandez, if he's listening, and he's no good. Anyway, well, thank you for joining. First thing I want to jump into is podcasting. We're like fellow podcasters, partners in crime. You've got your own podcast. I'd like to hear a little bit about it. I know now we're both on the Big Data Hub, IBM's Big Data Hub and Analytics Insights. How did you get into it? How did you get here? And then we'll go from there.
Okay, well, how I got into it was I was asked to do it. I embraced it right away because it's a natural extension of what I've been doing, and I wanted that challenge, and I enjoy podcasts. So to be on the other side of the microphone was just an incredible opportunity. The support team has made it into a great experience for not only me, of course, but for our listeners. We've covered a gamut of topics that I'm interested in. And if there's one thing that's been consistent in my career, it's education, and it's learning and sharing back to audiences. And so this is another outlet for that, a creative outlet. So I just embraced it, and I'm enjoying it immensely, and I hope everybody else is as well.
So you're kind of like me. We talked about this a little bit before the show, in that you're a data geek, or at least I could say that. At least I interpreted it as you being a data geek.
I embrace that.
You and me both. We had some questions because we've got this podcast, Making Data Simple, and then we got Data Decoded. With some of the listeners, we've got two podcasts named very similar. But like you, I take on a lot of different topics, but it all comes back to data. But I know you kind of feel the same way. You've dealt with blockchain and a whole other host of issues. I guess I don't see it as confusing as maybe some of the listeners, because it all comes back to data. But we're dealing with all kinds of different things. What do you think characterizes your podcast and differentiate your podcast versus other podcasts?
Yeah, I would just tell everybody to watch the space, and we'll figure it out. But we just can't wait, right? Because data is so important, and there's so much room for all the great education that people can get on data, and it will serve them well and serve their companies well. So I like to branch off of the idea of data, but I've taken it into so many different disciplines. Like you said, blockchain. I had Somar Nagana on, and we talked about blockchain on MDM. So we get technical at times, but I also like the thematic abilities that I have on the show, where we talked with Richard Hogg about Facebook and data privacy. We talked with Leonard about the history of technology. I always bring it back to data, but I love that I can take a really, really broad view of data. And frankly, data permeates so many different topics that I'm interested in. So it's really great in that way.
So why data? What does data mean to you? I know that, it's like the new oil. That's the terminology going around the industry right now. But what does it mean to you personally?
Yeah, it sure is. Well, I started out at IBM working on DB2, which is the quintessential.
That's okay. That's very good. I like
database. Yeah, and I've just tracked it ever since. But I think data is a competitive advantage for companies today. That's what I see. And I don't know any strategic objective of any company that isn't either supported or outright solved by solving the data challenge inherent within that challenge. So data, I can find my way in data to every company strategic objective and help out every objective by getting the data act together. That's something that I'll say on a regular basis. Get your data act together, and then you can do so much with that data.
So when you're doing consulting, or is it premised around, are you doing data mining? Are you doing, implementing operational data stores in your day job? You're doing warehousing, you're doing machine learning, you're doing everything under the sun. I mean, what do you spend most of your time?
I spend most of my time on data architecture, and that is provisioning workloads to their right platform, and not just the right platform category, but maybe the right tool, and making it all work as seamlessly as possible within the organization, within all the organizational parameters of which there are usually many. So governance, return on investment, I deal with budgets and people and all that for my clients, people engineering, organizational change management. That's a big part of what we do, and very important to get things across the goal line, so all of the above, really, and getting data into the right place to succeed for that organization.
But how does that engagement go? I mean, if you're talking about, let's take your statement, provisioning workloads to the right platform, does that essentially, in layman's terms, means a client calls you and says, my data's a mess, please get us to a point where it's met with trust, it's clean, it's met with integrity. I mean, it's data we can count on. Get us to that spot because we're not there today. And then you determine where they are in the maturity curve, and then you find a solution?
That is pretty close, actually. I get calls that are around that idea that you said there, which is my data's a mess. And finally, they've gotten to the point where they realize that and they're willing to do something about it. So as you know, these companies, they limp along, they Band-Aid patch their way forward. They don't think about the future. They think about their application. There's not a lot of long-term thinking. And one thing I like to say is that it doesn't take more time or budget to do it right, but it does take the right knowledge and it does take the right focus. And that's what I try to bring to these organizations. And yes, I do bring a maturity model in the door, and that helps me get them into some of the tactics and some of the technologies at times that will get them to the next level. So it helps prioritize and sequence the action plan over the course of time. So we get all these things on the docket, and my clients usually follow that to a T to success.
It's kind of like my garage. Starts out, you clean it, looks really nice. All of a sudden, 6 months later, kids get in there, they never put anything away, and then your data or your garage is a mess, and you got to clean it back up again. So do you have a kind of methodology around this, or does the methodology depend on the source and the destination that you're coming from and going to?
Well, I do bring lots of accelerators to the table. I do bring a methodology for execution of projects and a methodology for the execution of the strategy. And so, yes, bring a lot in the door, a lot of experience. But I would say that my experience is what comes through in these engagements that's more important than anything, because I've seen a lot. And so if these companies are dealing with a challenge, chances are I've seen some permutation of that somewhere else. And frankly, what I think I do in my consulting practice is I bring forward all the great ideas that I learned from my clients over the years. And I try to leave behind the bad things, right? So So I walk in the door with quite a bit, and that helps us to be a quick study of the situation and helps them to move maturity forward, but more important, move the business forward, because any ounce that you can move the data maturity forward, you are definitely moving the business forward as well.
Nice. So give me an example. If you walk into a client, they've invited you to say, look, our data's a mess. We need you to come over here and help us get from where we are to our desired destination. What's the first questioning that you start out with? I mean, how does that engagement start? And, tell me what that looks like.
I start with, what are your business objectives here? And, what's led you to this phone call and this engagement? And let's get into some more detail around that. So I want to understand current state. I want to envision with them a future state that's not made up not only of their requirements, that is what they can tell me they know they want. That's often quite limited. But by bringing the experience of so many other clients to bear and just having thought about this so much, I put a lot on the table so that becomes part of the future state that we want to move towards. And then we start laying out quarter by quarter. Here's what the environment should look like. Here's what your technology should look like. Here's what your staffing should look like. Here's what your organizational process should look like. And here's how we get there, inch by inch, step by step, day by day. But time's a wasting. And so many organizations, you put something out there for a year out, they will not move until it becomes really urgent. So I say time's a wasting, it's urgent now, and now's the time to capitalize on this grand opportunity that we have right now to make data into your competitive advantage, because that is what's going to define you.
Going back to my garage, it's kind of like that. It's got to get to a big mess before I finally say, all right, fine, I want to clean this thing up. So I got to believe in the business that you're in, you work to help create that sense of urgency so that they understand where they could be if they're able to, really, use data to their advantage, organize it, add governance, then get to machine learning, et cetera. Any tips or any tricks that you use to create that sense of urgency so that they're motivated to take action?
I mean, look for ways to, and I would advise everybody in every organization, every data professional to do this. Look at the strategic objectives of your company, and you don't have to look too hard to figure out that it's really the data challenge that is the challenge at getting to that objective. And with many organizations, like for example, we're working with an insurance company now. They're getting into telematics. Now, they didn't need me to tell them what telematics was, of course, but the reason that they can't get out of the starting gate is because they're looking at this mountain of data that comes in with telematics, and they're not sure, okay, where do we store it? How do we do this? How do we create action from this data? Analytics, So that just exemplifies how the data challenge is the challenge at moving companies forward. And I truly believe that companies that embrace those things in data that are going to stick, that are going to be important for competitive advantage, the earlier they do it, the better. And those are the ones that are going to actually win out in the long haul. So today, for example, we're looking at artificial intelligence. That is something that I think all companies should be looking into and considering for all new initiatives today.
So do I, by the way. So what levels are you usually talking to within that initial discussion?
It can be different levels, but it can be as much as the CEO who just sort of vaguely identifies that there's a problem over here and he or she can't get the reports that they want and is getting conflicting information from across the company. It can get on down into, vice presidents of different heads of business that I engage with, and sometimes even more in the technical realm. We have more technical challenges than otherwise. So I really engage a lot of different people in an organization. It used to be pretty straightforward, but now that IT is so disintermediated and technology professionals are scattered to the wind within organizations, it's become hard to pinpoint, where somebody like me, where our entry point is into an organization. And that's okay. There's just more opportunities. So it can come from anywhere.
But that's why I kind of asked the question in terms of how does that initial engagement go? Because it depends on what level of the organization you're talking to. A lot of times it depends. They either know they have a problem, but they don't know how bad it is. I mean, yeah. It's really all over the place. And that disintegration or that separation, I should say, between the IT and the business, I just adds to that complexity, as you just mentioned. I agree.
Oh, it's huge. As a matter of fact, and I hope all my, IT listeners, all your IT listeners out there don't take this the wrong way, but oftentimes it's people that are in IT that are holding back the progress, that needs to be made within an organization because they know how they can do it with coding, how they did it 10 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. But we really do need to move forward and raise the foundation of our companies through data.
All right, look, I know I've been monopolizing the conversation. That's a character flaw. That's typically what I do. I think you had some questions you wanted to ask me. And while I'd like to continue to ask you more questions, I'll go ahead and give you the floor.
All right. Well, thank you, because my inner podcast host was really dying to come out here.
I wonder how that worked on the other side. See, that's the tough one.
First of all, I really like your podcast, and I appreciate riding on your coattails into the IBM Analytics podcast series. And like I say, watch the space. We'll figure it out. But I am just so pleased to be here next to such a great, podcast host and podcast such as what you provide here. So thank you for that. But I want to get into some of the same kind of questions I think that you asked me. So How did it begin for you, and how did you become this host?
By the way, you're too kind. I am still learning, but just in line with the question you just asked, I got into podcasting specifically because I like to learn. It's one of my passions is to learn, and podcasting helps me with discipline around learning, getting interesting interviewees on the program so that I can learn from them. I can study before I drive the podcast. And so the bottom line is it was selfishly about learning. And the cool thing is when we started the podcast, I came up with several topics that I was interested in. We started getting some of our momentum. And now the cool thing is individuals in the external community are pinging us with their ideas. So now we got to decide of ideas that others want to bring to the table. And that's exciting to me because people that I would have met before are coming and discussing that their ideas, their innovations, how they view data, how they view governance, how they view analytics, all the data science. I could go down the list. It makes it for very interesting learning experience. And I like to get in front of people too. I like to share my ideas, even though some of them may be harebrained, but that's part of it, right? I got into data. My first career, I started, I was a programmer, and then ultimately made my way to Informix Software, which is a database company. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that data was my passion at the time, as I often say, because, you're young and I didn't know where I was going, but I can tell you data is absolutely my passion now. If I had three passions, and they change sometimes, maybe passions aren't supposed to change, but mine do. Number one is I just want to be inspired. A lot of things under that umbrella, and my family would be one, sports and different things like that. Secondly would be data, though. I love data. I do believe it's the center of the universe. Finally, it's getting its due. When I started, it was just, used for back-end systems, a means to get a job done. And now it's, answering questions. If you do it right and you use machine learning and AI that we were talking about earlier, it's providing answers for questions you haven't even thought of yet, which differentiates, companies. It's going to change the face of healthcare and so many other industries. And then thirdly, the client experience. And I guess that kind of leads back into the podcast as well. I like working with clients. I like people just in general. I learn from people. And, the one thing I think the millennials have right is the experience. There's some other things I struggle with. But in terms of experience, I think it's all experience. It's all data. For me, it's all about being inspired. There's my answer.
Well, great. And I can relate to a lot of what you said there, actually. And I didn't know you were at Informix. That's what I built my first 2 data warehouses on when I was back at Visa. So nice. Tremendous database.
Yes.
I miss it. I know it's still around. Sorry.
It is. Yeah. No, it's still here. It's still here. It's still going strong. And it's very good in the embedded market because there's such a low cost of ownership, and the footprint for an enterprise database is phenomenal in terms of the embed market. Great for IoT.
Great to know. Well, let's get into your real job here just a little bit. You are the Vice President of Hybrid Data Management and Client Success at IBM. So what's your big focus there in the coming months?
That's a big question. I have, it's quite a portfolio. When it's all things data. I don't have the Z systems. I got a peer that I work with on that, but it's essentially all things data, all distributed. So my focus in the coming months is really multifaceted. We're still working heavily with IBM Integrated Analytics System, which is our appliance. Doing extremely well is clients look to integrate software and hardware. While it's behind the firewall, it is designed such that, as we talked earlier, it's built on Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. It's set up in a microservices fashion. It even has a common SQL engine, meaning you can take those workloads and run them in the cloud. So you've got the appliance, you've got straight out DB2 is our database. Like I said, you chose wisely, which I think is the greatest database in the world. And with that, we continue to add advancements, whether it's build upon the HTAP functionality that we already have. We're supporting object storage. We're pushing it into the cloud where we handle events. We can handle 250 billion events a day, over 1 million records per second. It's a full-time job. And then we're also pushing into data virtualization and advancing that story. We're built on top of any repository like Hadoop. We've got different form factors, if you will, of our database. So that's kind of my day job, is I'm advancing the next generation database. And I can go further if you'd like. But the cool thing is it's all built on the same big common SQL engine where you can run your same application against any one of those. It's the same database, essentially, in any one of those form factors I just discussed. So that's why we call it truly hybrid, whether it's unstructured, structured, no SQL, SQL, analytics, operational, whatever. You can run your same application against any one of those form factors without a change whatsoever. And so I'm pushing those envelopes. We're also pushing with data virtualization the capability to drive IoT, in which case we're using the compute and storage on each one of the edge devices. We're leveraging the compute and storage so we can aggregate whatever information you're trying to bring back to the source in an efficient fashion. It's actually faster than putting everything in a data lake done right, if you can believe that, because we're able to optimize the path back to the source. That's kind of a high level, but that doesn't, we're building machine learning into everything that we do. So we're eating our own cooking. Like machine learning optimizer, natural language query, so you can issue just natural language instead of SQL to get queries back. We're putting that in the database. Autonomics are already in the database. It's founded on table stakes as the high availability and everything else that goes along with it. But then working alongside governance and building data science and everything that we do, machine learning is built in, like I said, both internally, but also we have a data science experience that's integrated within our products so that clients can use data science in any one of the form factors I discussed. So long-winded answer, but there's a lot of things that we're doing. And that does include the client success where we're transforming all of support, leveraging cognitive technology to help answer questions and prevent and predict questions that clients may have. I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, no, that was great. I'm going to play that back and make sure I understand every word of that, because what you're doing is a real bellwether for our industry, and all data professionals need to be aware of that. I certainly appreciate the flexibility that you're putting into your product set, that separation of compute and storage, and et cetera. I have worked with a lot of the products that I now know are coming from your organization. So that is fantastic. And by the way, I did choose well when I chose DB2, because on that interview day back a long time ago, IBM gave me the choice of DB2 or IMS or CICS and something else that I can't remember. And I didn't know the difference between those three. And I picked DB2 because I thought it sounded kind of cool there with the 2 at the end. So
yeah, you chose wisely.
One thing led to another. But getting back to how people know you, now we know about the products that you're putting out, but you're the host of Making Data Simple. And what are your goals and hopes for your podcast, Making Data Simple?
Well, I'd like to reach and help educate and have community educate me, but I'd like to reach an increasingly number of people to promote what I think is a fantastic strategy on the ladder to AI. And look, making data simple and accessible is a simple theme, but it's actually one we're trying to put in practice as a principle and as a driving factor within hybrid data management, my team. And so I'm trying to get those concepts out to the community and also learn from the community and see, use the feedback almost in a feedback loop in terms of the ideas that we get such that we're better in our products in line with the client experience.
That is great. And I'm taking notes on that because as a junior podcaster here, up and comer here, hopefully, I look to people like you that are doing this, and I'm glad you put the people first because that's how I do it. Is I'm all about really trying to help people and help people with their career, which I think helps them with their life, and that's the bottom line for me anyway. So,
look, I appreciate the kind words, but like I said, I'm still learning. I feel like I'm junior. I don't know that I'm ever going to be senior in this, but I will say this: I'm having fun, and that's the most important thing. I think having fun. I'm
absolutely
I'm meeting great people like you. Can't be any better than that.
Great point. That's great. Well, thank you for that, Al. And as this is a Making Data Simple podcast, you get the final word.
I get the final word. Well, look, you know what I do in my podcast? One thing that I like to do is I like to make this about individuals and making it personable. And maybe that's I think that's a suggestion for any podcast because people like to hear stories. They like to hear about individuals in addition to technology. Technology is great, but we're all human beings. We want to understand folks. So I'm going to end like I normally end, and I'd like to do a little lightning round with you, if you don't mind. If they're no good, we'll delete it, or if you don't like it.
Well, sure, why not?
All right, what are you reading today? Where do you find most of your time in terms of learning? What could you recommend to the audience?
Oh, I love to read, so I could go on about this. But right now I'm reading The Elephant in the Brain, Hidden Motives in Everyday Life by Robin Hanson. Love this book. I'm reading The Future of Humanity by Michio Kaku. I love thinking about those things and the future and where things will go. And I had an author, Rajeev Saxena, who wrote Pinto Has an Idea. And I had him on my podcast very recently. And so check that podcast out. And I have recently read his book as well. It's a novel, but it's a novel about the future and about this gentleman who is always thinking of innovative ways to tackle that future. So I thought that was a great book too.
Fantastic. We'll put that in the show notes. Are there any other podcasts you recommend? Because I'm a podcast junkie. That's another reason I got started.
Well, I listened to Data Driven by my friend Annie Leonard, who will actually be a guest on this podcast shortly. I listened to CXOTalk, which is nice overview of kind of where things are going from that perspective. And I listened to my friend Claudia Imhoff's BBBT podcast. So she interviews some up and coming and some very well established vendors out there.
Fantastic. What do you think is the biggest change in this industry in the next year for you or for the overall industry?
I think it's artificial intelligence. And I think it's sort of the embracing of that and the path to artificial intelligence and the different things we're going to be doing on that path and the different ways we're going to embrace it, both for our internal processes as well as the products that we put out to market. So, I think the world is ripe for quite a bit of change, and it's going to come from the artificial intelligence area.
Nice. You're an entrepreneur. What is your greatest professional fear?
Fear. I don't know if I relate to the fear thing so much. I just sort of go at things as hard as possible, and if I hit a roadblock or whatnot, then I'm working on something else. So that's okay, So I think we all fear the technology is going to outpace us, and specialists are going to come in certain fields. But that's not where my practice goes towards. I have to have the knowledge of the legacy environment as well as the modern environment to do what I do in organizations and make that kind of impact. So I have a method for staying on top of things. This is part of it. You're experiencing part of it now, which is just talking about some of the things that's going on. So hopefully I'm future-proofed, but you never know, I suppose.
Last question, maybe the toughest. What is the best podcast you've done so far and why?
Well, the IBM Think Conference was the first of its kind. As you know, it attracted some 30,000 odd number of people. The energy was palpable, and it was a great time, a year to be a part of it. And it's a great time for data. And that came through loud and clear at the Think conference. And I had an opportunity to interview Seth Dobrin shortly thereafter and get a recap on the Think conference. And in that podcast, we went through the many different announcements that were made. So many, I can't even name them right now, but so many announcements that people need to know about. So I thought he expressed what those things were very well, and we had a great conversation. So, I mean, I've liked them all. They're like, it's like choosing from amongst your children, right?
Yeah.
But I think that one stands out a little bit.
So look, thank you very much for being with me here today. I greatly appreciate it. Everybody listening, please take a listen to Data Decoded. William and I will be working together to get you the best information out there. I'll be listening, of course, William. But so thank you so much. I'm glad to have you as my co-conspirator in podcast land. So thank you, and greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Al. It's been great.
For all you listeners out there, please rate us. Please let us know how we're doing. We do pay attention, and we'll get the topics that you want to hear about. Reach out to me, reach out to our producers. You can get that in our show notes. But I greatly appreciate you listening. I do this for the entire community. Hopefully it's a betterment for everybody. So thank you. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Making Data Simple podcast, where we make data fun. Be sure to visit IBMBigDataHub.com/podcast to access the show notes and uncover even more great episodes. Remember, the views expressed here are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the views of IBM. Until next time, over and out.